Apple has made its pitch, but will consumers buy? Danielle Levitas is General Manager of Mobility and Consumer at IDC. She joins me now to answer that question and a lot more from our San Francisco Bureau. Nice to have you.
Thank you for having me, Bobby.
All right, so what was the highlight of the presentation?
I think the highlight for me were the new phones. It was definitely expected. Everyone knew a 4.7 and a 5.5 were coming to market. But the fact of the matter is the last two revs have been a little bit stale and not all that innovative. And the market's been crying out for a larger display. And I think when you look at this holiday season, you look into next year, the phones were, I think, the near term and midterm, big story here.
And you make a good point. They'll be out for the holidays. The watch is not going to be out for the holidays. What do you think about that? And what do you think about the watch?
Well, first I'll say in our forecast around wearables, we had predicted at the beginning of the year that Apple wouldn't launch a watch or a wearable until 2015. I'll say I was surprised that they announced so far ahead of making it available, so not under the Christmas tree. That being said, Apple knows what they need to do to just generate that interest and development around the software application ecosystem. So they're doing that ahead of time. So I think from that standpoint that I get the pre-announcement, but they're missing out on holiday 2014, and that also may mean that some folks that are Apple fans will potentially not pick up another wearable this holiday season and hold off till next year.
So obviously, if they want it, they have to hold off until next year. At that point, will consumers buy in? I mean, these are kind of expensive at $349 starting point.
I think compared to the competition, $349 is definitely higher, but Apple has always been a premium brand. And the Gen 1 products are always at a premium and going after, frankly, the more faithful of the bunch. I think when you look at $349, again, it's a starting price point. When you start to factor in different materials and even like the really high-end edition and alternative wristbands, these price points are probably going to go well above $1,000 even. And I'd imagine even $2,000 when you start talking about 18-karat gold. And so, long story short, I think $349 for the low end from Apple is about what we would have expected from an opening price point, Gen 1, from a premium brand like Apple.
So will it be a success ultimately? I mean, is it going to live up to expectations? And ultimately, is this going to be on a mass market? Is this going to be a mass market success?
I'm taking the long view with wearables in general and even with Apple in this space. So when you start to look at 2015, how big is it? Could Apple, Apple's going to dominate, I think, from a share standpoint. But the thing to remember is these devices work with iPhones, and there's going to be an enormous install base. Tim Cook alluded to the 200 million or so install base of 5, 5C, 5S out there, plus the 6s that are going to begin to ship. But it is a Gen 1 product, and so I think for 2015 it'll be competitive, it'll be a leader. But the real proof is going to be in the 2016 and sort of Gen 2 product and beyond, as the category starts to mature and applications really are going to become optimized for the form factor.
You talk about wearables and the growing importance of that. A large part of that is the health features and the apps, et cetera. Is that going to be a big part of the business that Apple's going to be successful in growing at this point?
I think it's table stakes today to do basic, healthcare monitoring. How many steps did you take? How fast is your heart, beating, et cetera. I think they did the quantified self in a more sort of sexy way and a more, setting goals. It's going to, learn what you're doing and then set goals for you proactively in the future. We'll see how well they do this, as we go forward. But I think to me, what they're doing today is table stakes. I mean, technically, they're not going to capture REM information because you're charging this thing at night. Which I don't think is a deal breaker. But point being, I was expecting there to be some true healthcare applications that would take it a step further beyond wellness. And they've been doing a lot of partnerships with Mayo Clinic and other hospitals and so forth, and I was hoping to see something around that. So again, this is maybe 2015 and clearly beyond that as well.
Apple Pay, a lot of excitement about this. The stock went up when they talked about it, but this is an area like the watches that other competitors have gone into these spaces and not been well received by consumers. They've been sort of indifferent. How successful will Apple Pay be with consumers in your mind?
Great question. I mean, I think the first thing that limits it is obviously it's going to be a sort of geography by geography launch. So initially it's launching in the US. The fact of the matter is we haven't seen NFC usage take off in any meaningful way here or in most other markets. I think the one advantage Apple has is they can educate consumers in a way that other brands, I think, have a harder time doing or just don't connect as well in sort of the simplicity. I think the notion of just sort of tap and go, I think for older consumers, there's going to be a serious education ramp of, can somebody swipe information off this thing? Can I accidentally pay for things and so forth? Not realizing the tight proximity factor. But I think in general, it's going to take education, and this is the company to do it. I think it will absolutely make people do it more. Do I think that all of a sudden NFC, touch-based payments are going to be the norm a year from now? No. I think it's, the infrastructure build-outs need to happen, even beyond the learning curve. So I think this is a long, steady slog, and not necessarily something we're going to see some sort of overnight success from Apple on.
And just looking back at the whole presentation, the stock went down in the end, in part when they talked about the watch being not available until the new year. Tim Cook gets a lot of criticism for the lack of innovation at Apple. Did this change much? I mean, the stock reaction wasn't so great.
I wonder how much of the stock reaction was a function of, investors had already made the decision. The stock got, moved up pretty dramatically, and they took their gains. So I wouldn't read too much into today. I mean, clearly, I think there's a little bit of disappointment, and I think the timing is probably the biggest factor. The device, in terms of the watch, is also dependent upon having an iPhone. They have a huge TAM, but it does limit the TAM. I think the bigger question that investors need to kind of think about is how can the new phones not only bring back Apple to an upgrade cycle, but can they win back some of the Android users of today that used to be Apple adopters, but left in some cases because of screen size alone? And I think that there's a lot of sort of short to mid-term upside for Apple in terms of the phone piece. I mean, I kind of feel like the watch is a long-term bet, and I think it's incredibly important, but for the short term, it's about the phone.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our thanks to Danielle Levitas of IDC. I'm Bobby Rebell. This is Reuters.